welcome, folks. Bienvenidos a todos. Good evening. It's so wonderful to have you all joining us tonight for the first in our multi-week series, Sephardic Industry Leaders, through our wonderful digital academy. My name is Ethan Marcus. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Director of Communications for the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America. It's the national umbrella organization for the Ladino-speaking Sephardic communities from Greece, Turkey, and the former Ottoman Empire that now reside in the United States the Great. We're so happy to have you here for our first in this series. This is through our brand new Sephardic Digital Academy initiative, a wonderful repository of classes on Ladino language and culture, Sephardic Torah, Halakha, Sephardic culture, cooking, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more about the Sephardic Digital Academy, please feel free to reach out. You can check out our website at sephardicbrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. It's now such a pleasure. We're partnering tonight with our own Young Professionals Network, our Greek, Jewish, and Sephardic Young Professionals Networks, primarily based in New York and Seattle. And we're really excited to have a very special speaker to kick off this series, Mr. David Naggar. I'm just going to pull up his bio here just so you get a little sense of his background. David was born in New York City to Jewish immigrant parents who had been both born in Egypt, but whose original families no longer found themselves welcome in the country of their birth after the events of the Suez Crisis in 1956. David grew up in New York, attending Stuyvesant High School and then Cornell University. In 1985, after his junior year at Cornell, he interned at Warner Books, eventually accepting a full-time position at the publisher after his graduation in 1986. He also went to NYU's Stern School of Business, where he got an MBA in 1991, but more importantly, met his future wife, Karen. Over 20 years in book publishing, David held many roles at Warner, Batman Doubleday Dell, Francis Luciris in Paris, and Random House, including head of US sales for Random House and then president of one of Random House's publishing divisions. In 2009, David and his family moved to Seattle, where he joined the Kindle content team at Amazon. He now oversees all aspects of Amazon's books and Kindle content businesses worldwide. At Amazon, he works with a passionate team dedicated to inspiring the world to read more and get more out of reading. David and Karen are the proud parents of 5 children who range from 24 to 14. David, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
I have to unmute myself. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
We can certainly hear you.
All right. Thank you for having me. When Al Myman asks, you say yes. That's my basic rule of thumb.
The master Sephardi of Seattle, you have to always say yes.
Always yes.
So the way this is going to work tonight, folks, is that we have a couple of questions to ask David to discuss just about his heritage, about his career and his experience as a leader in both the publishing and kind of technology industry. And then we'll open up the questions to you so you can all ask away. So first, David, maybe you can speak a little about kind of your time building yourself up in the publishing industry. What kind of prompted you to get involved? This is not an industry I would personally think about as something I'd be really passionate about just coming out of college.
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First, I've always been a pretty big reader. I grew up in a house full of books, as many Jewish families do. My mother was in the books business from when I was a small child and is a literary agent. My sister is a literary agent, so I come by the books passion honestly, I would say. And actually was convinced for many years growing up that I was going to be a lawyer. That was my path to happiness, and worked in a law firm as a messenger when I was 16 and 17, and did something I'm sure not entirely legal. I was opening the packages I was messengering just to see what these people worked on every day, because frankly, none of them looked particularly happy and around the office. And I must say I was not particularly impressed with, it was a real estate law firm, a friend of my father's. And it looked boring from their perspective and from what I read. And then I took a law school class at college, didn't like that either. So then started casting around looking for something to do. And my mother suggested I might reach out to some people, somebody who I knew because I babysat his children, who happened to work in publishing, to see if I could get a summer internship. And that's how I wound up at Warner Books. And never look back, frankly. I have been in the books business now since the age of 20. I'm 55, you do the math. I think that's 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Does the publishing skills go into math skills? I'm not so sure, but
No, that's 7 or 8. Well, my father is an electrical engineer, so I get the benefit of both sides.
So maybe you can speak a little bit about the book industry today as it compared to maybe 20 years ago or more, even when you first got into it, and how we've seen kind of really major shifts in what it means to like how we read in this country, how people read books and how people acquire them, and how really publishers now deal with new publications and self-publications, all these kind of crazy things that are really changing in technology.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest change in the most sort of momentous change of the last 30 years has been the advent of self-publishing. Self-publishing always existed. If you think about a restrictive system, book publishing for many generations, decades, if not more, was probably one of the more restrictive systems around. You know, everybody likes to think they have a book. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who's, oh, you work in publishing. Oh, well, you know, I fancy myself a bit of a writer, you know, could you help me out? And I think writing is something that just about everyone who has a story to tell thinks they can write a book. They write a book. And if you think about the funnel, where at the top of the funnel is everybody who wants to write a book and find an audience for that book. And the next layer down 30 years ago was all of those who knew they should go look for a literary agent. And then the funnel again diminishes by all those people who looked for an agent who actually found one who would represent them. And then the funnel diminishes again when it's all those people presented by a literary agent who the agent manages to get their book sold to a publisher. And the funnel diminishes yet again to the people whose books sell to publishers at a rate that they can use to live from. Not just I sold one book, I got a $30,000 advance, thank you, it was very nice. It's I can actually feed myself, feed my family, put a roof over my head through my writing. So that number from that initial top of the funnel becomes vanishingly small. And that was the system that existed. You know, you literally had to win the lottery in order to get a book published that you could live your life from. And so there've been lots of sort of seismic moves in the book business over 30 years around distribution systems. And it used to be bookstores, then chain bookstores, then distribution into what you call big box retailers like Walmart, Target, Costco, the advent of digital reading. But really the most seismic change has been the advent of self-publishing. So self-publishing has been around forever. It used to be called vanity publishing because you would pay quite a bit of money to have your book printed, and you'd have those boxes of books in your, you know, and companies would do this to hand out corporate histories to their employees, or wealthy individuals would do it because they wanted to write a book about their family history and give it to the family. Occasionally authors would write and self-publish their books and then sell them out of the trunk of their car. I believe John Grisham started that way. But it never was something that you would actually, that was easy or inexpensive. And then with the advent of both digital reading and publishing and print on demand technology, where a book is just printed as it's needed, all of a sudden, anybody who has a book to write just has to write it, Word document, they upload it into the direct publishing service, Amazon has one, and all of a sudden your detail page is right next to John Grisham's in the store. And so what that, I mean, at this point, self-publishing, and for those of you who wonder, you know, what kind of books, the Martian, that was made into a movie with Matt Damon, started as a self-published book. 50 Shades of Grey, believe it or not, she sold 500,000 copies self-published before deciding to take the 7 or 8 figure check from Random House. It's work, right? Publishers do add a lot of value in what they do. They edit your book, they market it, they publicize it. But the sea change that I'm talking about is really that the value publishers added is focused on those things as opposed to the big capital intensive investments they used to make in printing and warehousing and storage and distribution. The advent of self-publishing has made that less valuable.
And maybe you can speak a bit about the concept of self-publishing, because when I think of self-publishing, or at least I think the most common people, they think kind of the quality might be lesser because it's self-published as opposed to through an actual publishing house. Have we still seen that as the case today with kind of the advent of mass access to self-publishing, or is it much more higher quality content we're really seeing out of the self-publishing kind of area?
Yeah, I think what happened in publishing over 30 or 40 years was massive consolidation in the traditional publishing world, where the Penguin Random House is the largest publisher in the world today. There used to be a Doubleday publisher, a Dell Publishing, and Bantam Publishing. Doubleday and Dell merged in '87. Bantam, Doubleday, and Dell became one company in '88. In '98, Random House was folded in, and Random House itself was a conglomeration of many, many publishing houses that used to be standalone, like Ballantine or Random House or Knopf. And then Penguin, which itself was another consolidated set of former standalone publishers, was added, and Penguin Random House was formed 10 years ago. And now Simon & Schuster, one of the best known publishers, is up for sale by its parent company, CBS Viacom, and Penguin Random House is trying to buy that one as well. So this massive consolidation, by the way, the sales didn't go up as these companies were bought. What these large media companies, which I've worked in for 2 decades, what they're very good at is pulling cost out of the bottom. So as they merge the companies, their people's jobs disappear. There's overlap. There's cost pulled out in the operation and the warehousing. And they have more leverage in negotiating with printers, with retailers like Amazon. And so, the profitability goes up. But the bottom line is a lot of people lose their jobs. Well, what those people were able to do with the advent of the internet was hang out their own shingle. And so what you have today is an ecosystem of editors, marketers, and publicists that you can hire, work for hire, and they have lots of different business models. And pay me a fixed fee, pay me a percentage of the revenue your book brings in, pay me however, hourly. But you can find someone who was an editor for 15 years at Random House to edit your book, and you hire them and they do that for you. So there is an upfront investment, which is relatively small, and you can get your book copy edited, story edited. You can hire an artist to do a cover. So the notion of quality, and by the way, I'm not sure if you regularly are publishing, celebrity tell-all bios that you can make a claim that traditional publishing is all about quality. Traditional publishing publishes a lot of quality, but they publish a lot of books just to make money. I was in those meetings where we were discussing the profit and loss statements of how much we would pay for a Kardashian biography. Not literature, and it's not high quality. Frankly, the biggest arbiter of quality is customer reviews. They will tell you very frankly what they think of your book. And when we analyze sort of the customer reviews of self-published books, the ratings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the Amazon store, and traditionally published books, there's very little difference. Actually, there's no difference. And the reason for that, so if you're in the publishing industry, all these names like Knopf and Bantam and Doubleday, they're super meaningful. If you're not, you couldn't care less. There's only, in my opinion, and I'm sure industry insiders would have varying opinions, but there's only been a couple of publishing companies that were a brand unto themselves. Harlequin was able to do it, where people didn't really care what the title of the book was or the author. They said, I'm buying the next Harlequin book. In fact, they would subscribe. Penguin Classics, maybe. Scholastic to a smaller extent. But when I was the head of sales at Random House, invariably, once a quarter, one of the publishers of the imprints would come into my office and say, you know what I want to do? I want to invest some time and some effort, and I want to turn my imprint into a brand. And I would say, great, we'll put the efforts of the sales department behind it. But before we do that, I want you to do one thing for me. And this was before digital books. And I said, this is in New York City. I said, I want you to go on the subway and I want you to find 10 people who are reading books, which is super easy to do on the New York City subway. And then I want you to take the book away from the person. Don't mug them, ask them, but then ask them, I want you to tell me the name of the book that you're reading. And out of the 10 that you ask, 6 or 7 of them will be able to tell you with some degree of accuracy the name of the book. It's, the Demonica Code, the something Italian name with a code at the end. Oh, Da Vinci Code. Yes, that one. Then I want you to, so, you're at about 6 or 7 of the 10 can do it, but 3 or 4 probably can't. Then I want you to ask them, what's the name of the author of the book you're reading? Now you're probably down to 4 or 5 people who can tell you without looking at the book who the writer is. I said, then I want you to ask them who the publisher is. And now you're down to 1 person, and that person works in publishing. And that's it. Nobody cares. I could name some very well-established, century-old publishing houses, and most of you would have you've never heard of them. And that's okay. But what people are buying is the author. They're buying the work of the author, and they're willing to try new works from authors they've never heard of based on word of mouth. Nothing is more powerful than someone whose literary taste you trust or who's recommended books to you before that you've read and loved, saying to you, Ethan, you've got to read this book. Extremely high probability you pick it up. And then as you work your way down, so there's that, there's your independent bookstore who's known you for a long time, and you walk in and you say, I'm going on a 4-book vacation. What should I read? Ethan, you should read these 4 books. Put that bestseller down. I knew it would catch your eye, but you're going to hate it. These are the 4 you should take with you, right? And so you work your way all the way up to walking through a Costco, and you pick up a book. You have no idea. If you don't recognize it, you need something else to help you read the flap copy. You'll do whatever. Amazon, you've got customer reviews and ratings. And so what we find is that customers are willing to take chances on books where they see a signal, either from someone they like and they generally take advice from, or even, I see 4,000 reviews and the book is rated 4.5 stars in the Amazon store, I'll give it a shot. And so it really doesn't matter, what and independent authors are very, very savvy. They write their books and then they run it like a business. And they will give imprint names they'll put on the spine of the book. It's got to have something on it. My mother, after a very long and illustrious career in book publishing, became an author. She is a published author. She's written a memoir about growing up in Egypt called Sipping from the Nile. And she's recently published a fiction title called Footprints on the Heart. Well, her memoir, if you look at the spine of the book, it's come out from Stony Creek Press. You have no idea if that's an imprint of Random House. If I told you Stony Creek Press, and then I named, Clarkson Potter, and I said to you, which is the self-published invented name of an imprint, and which is an established, 100-year-old cookbook publisher at Random House, 99% of the population would have no idea. I'm not going to quiz anybody. Rest easy. But and so with the access to the services that will make an excellent book, editing, marketing, publicity, copy editing, that are easily accessible and cheap, relatively cheap, with the lack of recognition of most consumers of who published the book, self-publishing has become as big, frankly, as any of the biggest publishers, which is extraordinary. So you ask me what's the biggest sea change, it's definitely been that. There has never been an easier time to be an author, write a book, and get it in front of an audience. in history. So it's kind of extraordinary.
That's amazing. I want to take a second, maybe transition a little bit and talk a bit about your personal Sephardic background, because you mentioned in passing how you grew up in a house with books, something that influenced your love of books, your love of publishing. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your Sephardic heritage and maybe how that's impacted your career and kind of your industry insights that have kind of stemmed from that Sephardic Egyptian heritage.
Might be a little bit of a reach to, industry insights stemming from the Sephardic heritage. I'm a firm believer that the biggest benefit you get from being Sephardi is the food, for sure. We were very lucky that where our forebears grew up, there were spices, and we didn't have to boil everything. So, I grew up in a house with 2 immigrant parents and a brother and a sister. I was very conscious of my Sephardic heritage, though there were aspects of it that were a little unbelievable to us. We grew up in an apartment in Manhattan on 72nd Street, and we would look at pictures of the houses where my parents grew up in Cairo, or where my grandmother grew up in Alexandria, and frankly, we thought it was all a fairy tale. These were, very, very big homes, very, let's put it this way, the home that my mother grew up in Cairo is now the Russian ambassador's residence on the Nile. And so that gives you an idea of the kind of homes that they lived in. And so, it was very foreign to us in that regard, but I definitely sensed I was different. And this is New York City in the 70s and early 80s. Most of my Jewish friends were Ashkenazi, and there were definite differences in the way we observed. Certainly language and pronunciation, sure, but traditions and observation of holidays were different. There's much. What I love about Sephardic culture is everybody prays the same way when they come to synagogue. But if you want to leave the synagogue and get in your car and drive home on Shabbat, that's your choice. And generally, everyone's fine with it. Make your choice. But when you come to synagogue, you're going to pray exactly the same way as everybody else. And even though you may not be observant, you actually know those prayers. My wife and I lived in France for 3.5 years, and we used to go to my father-in-law's very small Moroccan shul in the 17th arrondissement. And, the guy gets out of his car smoking a cigarette, puts it out, puts on a kippah, walks into the synagogue, and he is praying as loudly and as fluently as anyone else in the shul. And the difference between that and what I perceived of my Ashkenazi friends, of whom I had, quite a few, was that they were classified. And the classifications were relatively strict. And everybody had a label. You were Reformed or Orthodox or Conservative or Conservadox. And the proliferation of names to try and let you have your label was kind of extraordinary, right? There's 8 different gradations between ultra-Orthodox, modern Orthodox, Orthodox, Conservadox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. I can't believe I just named them all, by the way. I don't know where that came from. What synapse just fired to allow me to do that, but we'll go with it. Whereas in Sephardi culture, you're Sephardic. And I actually, no judgment. I believe it's a healthier way to have a robust Jewish community. And one man's opinion, I'm sure there will be lots of disagreement, but I feel like the more inclusive you can be, there's a very famous saying, when everyone's thinking alike, no one's thinking at all. And so whether it's your workplace, whether it's your whatever situation you're in, it makes life more complicated because you're debating and defending a lot, but Jews are used to that. And I feel like the more diverse conversations you can have in life, the better decisions you're going to make, the better advice you're going to give. Frankly, the more interesting your time is going to be.
I don't think
I
I
don't
could
know
have.
if that answered your question, but
No,
there.
that was wonderful. Like, I don't think I could have. I was just going to say, I don't think I could have better stated the beauty of Sephardic value and tradition, and the fact that we both welcome everybody, no matter their observance level, and also recognize that there is a spectrum of observance, but we're ultimately one kahal, one community, which I personally find, I think the Sephardic Brotherhood certainly finds it so beautiful. So thank you for that. We'll put
And
into
the
it
food.
like,
Don't
and the
forget
food. Don't forget the food.
about the food.
I'm curious also, maybe you can speak a little about, this is not your personal experience, but that of your parents. Did your parents leaving Egypt at a very difficult time, did they ever discuss it with you? Did they ever sit you down saying, this is what we experienced. It was very hard leaving. They didn't treat us well, etc.
We didn't talk about it a lot growing up. I think they waited until we were older. We would hear the family stories, but they were generally more positive stories about the cousins growing up together and being very close. And I think there were dozens of cousins, first cousins. And what I found very interesting, particularly about my mother's family, is that those first cousins, my mother and her brother and sister and their first cousins, really grew up like siblings. And their children, so we're second cousins, grew up like first cousins in most other families and cultures. My second cousin, with whom I'm very close in London, when I go to London on business, I always stay with them over the weekend. And he was laughing because he said, I told my friend that my cousin's coming to stay. My cousin from America is coming to stay for the weekend. And the guy looked at me and said, "Oh, how are you related?" And I explained that we share a great grandmother. And he's like, you guys are barely family. And for us, we are very close. So from that aspect, we knew we had family all over Europe. But we didn't, I'll say because I have no idea what my sister knew or my brother knew, but I didn't have a strong sense of how they grew up other than these pictures in a photo album. And then in 1990, we went on a trip to Israel. My mother, it was the time of glasnost between the US and at the time the USSR. And my mother had I'm going to get this wrong. I know Mummy's on the call. I apologize in advance. But I think it was a friend of hers who knew someone kind of thing at the State Department, and organized a formal visit for us when we were in Cairo. We were going to go to Egypt for 2 weeks. They were going to show us the school where they went as children, where they had met, etc. And they were trying to get us in to see my mother's house. My father's house had been torn down and replaced with a building. And so we actually went to this house. We were received by the Sioux ambassador, and a little reception with caviar, whatever, and tea. And we were walking around the house, and it was so interesting to watch the Sioux ambassador following the five of us as we walked around the house, with my mother saying, "Yeah, that was Uncle Jeff's playroom. That was where Auntie Helen slept up there." And he was like this. He couldn't believe it. And for us, I think for me, it was the first time that existence really came. I mean, when you walk into that house and you see the grounds and you see the Nile and you see the pyramids in the distance and you see the double marble staircase and all of this stuff, and most of it taken away, it sort of crashes in on you a little differently. And there's a couple of really amazing stories in the memoir that my mother wrote. I'll tell you one, which is my favorite. She and her close friend from growing up, a woman we knew as Mrs. Sheriff, but was her close friend from growing up, who grew up in the mansion down the road or whatever, and had the same experience, Jewish family, kicked out, confiscated everything. Flash forward several decades, and her house, by the way, became the presidential residence. The Sadats lived there. And flash forward several decades, and my mother is going with Mrs. Sheriff to the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan to listen to Mrs. Sadat speak, because she's in town and she's giving lectures. And she gives this lecture, and my mother and Mrs. Sheriff go up to Mrs. Sadat after the lecture, and they start talking. Three women with a shared experience of Egypt, and they're getting along very well. And as the conversation is ending, apparently Mrs. Sadat said to the two of them, if you're ever in Cairo, Beiti Beitak, which is Arabic for my house is your house. And poor Mrs. Sheriff is standing there saying, your house actually is my house. So, you know, it's a very common Jewish story. You can debate the specifics of you know, the degree of wealth or involvement in the local government or, you know, position in society, but just about every Jewish family has a similar story. And the amazing thing is, you leave it behind, and you say, oops, we start again. My grandmother, my mother's mother, who grew up and spent her life until her late 50s in that kind of existence, very, you know, servants and chauffeurs and all of this, it was the most amazing thing to me. I never once, and she was alive until her late 90s, heard her complain. Not once. She lost her husband very young. She then went to take care of her mother. She was living in Geneva. Her mother died. She moved to New York, where two of her children were. She started working at Weight Watchers and painting in her 70s. Like, I never once heard her say, oh, woe is me, let's talk about what I lost, what was taken away from me, et cetera. You know, we talk about the COVID isolation. During that time, things were pretty dangerous in Egypt. And my mother, at 18 years old, was, I think it was a year, don't know. Uncle Jeff, I can see you nod. Was it a year that they were not allowed to leave? Just nod or shake your head. Let's go with yes. All right. There's a saying in Italian, si non è vero, è ben trovato, which means if your story's not true, it's still a great story. So I'm not even going to go for the facts anymore. So for a year, at 18 years old, she was basically teaching her 10 years younger sister and two other kids school, because they couldn't leave. They couldn't get out. My grandfather was trying to get passports from the Italian embassy because he was Italian national. And so they were isolated and quite overtly dangerous, not a virus that you can't see, but you know, Nasser's people not very happy with the Jews, but not willing to let them leave either.
Incredible. Wow, so much incredible history. And as David mentioned, his mother did write a memoir, so I encourage you all to check that out as well. Probably can get it off on Amazon as well.
If you're going to get it as a result of this call, sipping from the Nile, and definitely buy it from Amazon.
Speaking of Amazon, I wanted to transition to your work today as Global Vice President for Amazon Books and Kindle Content. This is a major role. It's a lot of responsibilities, certainly. I'm curious, we're in 2020 now. We've seen Amazon was originally started as a book, platform, as a publishing platform. And today it still remains a major publishing platform. Where do you see kind of Amazon going in the next 10, 20, 30 years in regards to its books productions?
Yeah, I will say it's quite a responsibility to be running the first business that Amazon ever had. I've been incredibly lucky, actually, to spend my whole career in what has been my passion. I think when it comes to career, there's lots of different categories. I sort of divide people into three different groups. I'm super passionate about this domain. I don't really care what I do within that domain. It could mean I love music. I don't mind if I'm a producer or a talent scout, or I would do anything. Then there is, I'm really passionate about this particular task, and I could do it in any domain. So I love operations. I love managing a warehouse. I don't care if that warehouse is filled with books or sneakers or computers. The third bucket, it is the most restrained in terms of job availability, but if you find your pleasure, you are the happiest. which is I want to do operations in books. And so you're fairly restrained. You want to limit yourself on both vectors. But if you find the right job, you're super happy. I'm in the first bucket. I have been an acquiring editor. I have been in finance, in marketing, direct marketing at the French Book Club. I have been running the sales force, running a division, now working on the retail side. I don't care as long as it's books. So Amazon's evolution has been super interesting. They brought me in for Kindle, and then I've been very, very lucky that they've just added responsibility every couple of years in the decade that I've been with the company, to the point where we combined the print and Kindle businesses at the beginning of 19. And so, you know, I've had sort of the whole view, and in all countries, of Kindle and print. Print book is very much alive and kicking, and so is the digital book. So I see the books. The difficulty for books is not I don't consider Barnes and Noble my competitor. I consider TikTok my competitor. I consider Snapchat my competitor, because what I'm competing for is people's time. And there is a generation where the distraction is so easy and so simple. And a book is an effort. You've got to commit to it. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about what are the forms of reading that will attract a younger audience. I'll give you one example. There's something called online literature in China. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's basically never-ending stories. Authors will write 1,000 or 2,000 words a week. They'll make it available. Customers they're mostly reading on their phones, and it's mostly a younger audience. And then they can send feedback to the author about what they think should happen next, if the author wants that feedback. So it's very interactive. There's a voting, you know, this is my favorite story, whatever. And it never ends. You have these stories that are 6,000 or 7,000 episodes long. Manga is a form of comic in Japan, which is very, very big in the US as well. I am a big believer that long form reading is societally important. Your ability to follow any story over its long arc, because every well-written story takes you from here to here, down to here, maybe back up, then down, and then there's a climax. Your ability to follow that story over 300 or 400 pages, I believe, trains your brain to be able to follow the long arc narrative of a political debate, or the long arc of a relationship. I think your brain actually does get trained in a way by reading long form. So I am fanatical in my belief that we have to do everything we can to get people to read more. I don't really care what it is. I don't care what you read, as long as you're reading. So I see Amazon, well, my push to my team, let me put it that way, is what are the forms of reading we can invent or bring from other countries to different countries that don't have that form yet, that will inspire a younger generation to read. And it's a pretty complicated problem, but I look forward to working on it. It's another passion project.
So with that, I want to open up the floor to questions from the audience. If you have a question, I'd ask either one of two things. Either you type it directly into the chat box and we will read it out, or you can also use the blue raised hand function on your Zoom participants pad, and we'll try to unmute you and get to you as many as possible. So we already do have a number of questions in the chat, which is great. One question here, an interesting one I didn't know about. Israel has recently put a law into place that does not allow the chain stores or major book providers to severely discount prices with the hopes of protecting authors' livelihoods. What are your thoughts on this issue? Do you think this is a good approach to kind of managing price issues? And maybe even expanding that further, what are you think some of the challenges when we talk about local bookstores kind of being potentially even pushed out or at least minimized by major providers like Amazon?
Yeah, I'll address the second part of your question first, because it's a myth that independent bookstores are suffering in the age of Amazon. They've actually, if you look at the data in the US, you would argue that the last decade has been among Amazon's strongest in terms of growth, and particularly in the book business and the advent of digital. And the number of independent bookstores has increased like a metronome, double digits every year in that decade. And if you ask me, the competition was much more between the, it is not a coincidence, let me answer it this way, that as Borders went out of business and Barnes & Noble struggled, that the independents came back strong. It's there. So if you think about it as a, remember what I said earlier about book recommendations, and nobody in retailing, book retailing, does it better than an independent bookstore. So they have a relatively limited selection. They don't have the funds to do deep discounting, but they're great at service and recommendations and knowledge of their customer. At the other extreme, you had the Barnes and Nobles and the Borders, where they have big selection, so much bigger than an independent, much better prices than an independent, but a lot of the people walking the floor don't really know how to recommend a book to you, or they won't recognize the author you're asking for, which would never happen in an independent. And so the competition between them was pretty fierce, because you're going into a store. Then you have Amazon who shows up, and what you found was that those chain stores were stuck in the middle. They couldn't compete with Amazon on selection, because Amazon has infinite shelf space. Amazon was matching the prices, so there was no advantage to the lower prices. Amazon wasn't setting lower prices, but it was always going to be as low as the nearest competitor. And so the chains couldn't compete with Amazon on price or selection, and they couldn't compete with the independents on recommendation, and they got caught in a no man's land in between the two. And so as the chains started to diminish in strength, you have Amazon growing and the independents growing. So that, just to answer your second question first. Fixed price laws exist in many countries. Germany, France, Italy, Brazil has sort of an odd hybrid of a fixed price law where there's some discounting allowed, but not all. Japan has a bit of somewhat of a fixed price law. France, in true French fashion, and I get to say this because I am French and I married a French woman and my father's French, in true French fashion, said that there will be discounts only allowed by certain retailers, but not others. And I don't think that the fixed price law, it's a very complicated question, not an easy question, right? It depends on the end price that the customer is going to pay. If you have a fixed price law and the price that the customer is going to pay for a book is a good price, a motivating price for a customer to pick up a book, then fixed price law is great. If a fixed price law is, and by the way, Amazon is the #1 bookseller in many countries with fixed price law. It's not about competing on price, it's about competing on selection and service. Where you see deep discounting, like in the US, it's usually, well, A, the system is set up that way, but also very few people would be buying books at the undiscounted prices that publishers set. The Obama book is coming out in a few weeks, Barack Obama's book. It's going to be 750 pages, it's going to be a massive bestseller. The publisher's list price is going to be $40, maybe even $45. Who's going to pay that? And so the discounting there serves a purpose to get the books to a level, and it's wrapped up in an economic model. What is the purchase discount of the retailer to allow them to do that discounting so that they can still have a profit at the end of the day? So fixed price law is a very complex question that I think has too many variables to say unequivocally it's a good idea or a bad idea. There's too many questions I'd ask around what is the overall environment, pricing environment, what is the consumer's willingness to pay? Are you handicapping by having too high a price? If you're pricing correctly, fixed price all day long. Why not?
See what other questions we have here. A question regarding structures and ownership models. What are your thoughts on balancing bottom-up with top-down initiatives across business units / organizations?
I did not hear the question.
Sorry. What are your thoughts on balancing bottom-up with top-down initiatives across business units or organizations?
It's a very different question from the first one. What are my thoughts on bottom-up versus top-down? Not sure I understand the question. Do you mean the initiatives that are being driven, that are being decided, like this year we're going to work on this, and it's driven by the person in charge versus the team itself? Is that the question?
Boaz, actually, would you like to ask the question more clearly?
Sure. So I work also in Amazon, and there's always a balance where the ideas, the initiatives come from grassroots, from engineers or business teams versus from leadership, management. And then sometimes there's a conflict between long-term strategy and we've got this now ready and we can go to market. So how do we balance this? Sometimes one tropes the other, and sometimes it actually could be a one-way door that creates maybe anti-patterns or bad decisions.
Yeah, so that the key is what you just said, right? There is, and Boaz works at Amazon, so it's terminology we use within the company. It's knowing the difference between a one-way door and a two-way door. And it is exactly what it sounds like. A one-way door is something you walk through as a business, either a decision you make on a customer-facing proposition or a product you launch or a statement you make that is very hard to walk back from. Will be very expensive, define expensive, not just monetarily, reputationally, regulatory, whatever. Once you walk through, it's very hard to walk backwards. A two-way door is something you could step through and step back if it doesn't work. And so the fundamental operating principle that Amazon uses, and I do within the Books and Kindle org, is walk very quickly through two-way doors, learn what you need to do, and either keep going or come back. Be very thoughtful and intentional and cautious around one-way doors. And we also spend a lot of time thinking about, we really want to try this. The way we've defined it makes it a one-way door. How do we adapt it so that it is a two-way door? I'll give you a very simplistic example. I'm going to set the price for this service, device, whatever, product at $30. Could be a one-way door. You're never going to be able to take the price up from there. You can always go down. Very hard to raise the price by any meaningful number. But we're really not sure $30 is the right price. We think it might be too low. Well, set the price at $60, offer a $30 discount for 3 months, new launch, whatever, and all of a sudden you've effectively set the price at $30 so you can learn for those 3 months what the impact is of uptake of whatever it is you're offering at that price, and then say, okay, is 60 the right price? Should it be 50, 40, or was I right at 30? And then you walk through the one-way door. It's a very simplistic example. Doesn't work perfectly, but once you understand the difference and your team understands the difference between one-way doors and two-way doors, at the grassroots level, go walk through them all day long if they're two-way doors. And then you escalate to me, the one-way door, and we'll have a very intentional debate about whether we walk through it. Otherwise, the organization grinds to a halt. If everything is generated at the top or frozen at the top, the organization grinds to a halt. It's a disaster.
Awesome. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Joe Halio. Joe, if you just unmute yourself, he has a question regarding Sephardic books specifically.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? Okay, so I'm just wondering about, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, so a little bit of background. I have a little bit of background in published Sephardic books with a not-for-profit Sephardic foundation. We've published over 15 books, but all of it's been done by word of mouth. And we have a new book coming out in the next month or two, and I'm just wondering if there are any other advantageous ways to market the book rather than just by word of mouth in the Sephardic community. because not only is it a Sephardic story, but it's a Holocaust story, and that should have a greater appeal. So, and I know nothing about Kindle. So I'm just wondering if you can, at some time in the future, maybe not right now, but maybe through email, we can communicate about other ideas about marketing it. Price is not important to me because it's a not-for-profit. So I was just wondering if you had some ideas about that other than just word of mouth in the Sephardic community.
Yeah, I mean, any marketing, whether it's for the Sephardic community or any other, is knowing how to get in touch with the potential customers who are likely to buy your book, product, whatever. So to the extent that word of mouth is great, but slow and generally small blast radius. There are lots of things you can be doing. You can be buying lists of email lists of Sephardic organizations. You can hire a marketer who will put together a program specifically aimed at, remember all those people I told you about who used to work at publishing houses pre-consolidation? Those people are available. If you Google book marketer, you'll get pages of results of people you could hire to set up a marketing program for this book. And it's work, right? If you're going to rely on word of mouth, it's less work, but you're going to have to get out there. The author is going to need to be speaking. My mother when she published her memoir, she self-published it at the beginning. She ended up being picked up by a publisher, but she self-published it. And she was, going and lecturing at telling her story and showing the book at synagogues in the tri-state area, Jewish organizations, women's groups. There are a lot of both Holocaust and Sephardi affinity groups around. It's a question of finding out how to send them an email with a description of the book, how to offer your author to speak in front of the group, take the book with them, sell it at the speaking engagement, et cetera. A lot of opportunities.
Great. We have a question here from Benjamin Hadar. I just need you to unmute.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Ben Hadar. I'm a high school student. I live in Miami Beach. So I'm very interested in music, all parts of the industry, but I'm also very interested in like the selling, like different parts of the business, like selling guitars, selling different types of stuff. So I was considering starting my own online business. Do you have any advice so I could run my own company, like best way to run my own company, or just little things that can help?
You have to figure out first if you're selling physical goods or off this online store, or if you're selling digital goods, or both.
It's more physical goods, like guitars.
Okay. A lot of things you're going to need to think about. I'm not sure we have enough time to discuss them all, but where are you going to get your inventory from? How much are you going to buy it for? Where are you going to store it? That is going to define your ability to price those guitars and make a profit. Shipping of guitars, I know nothing about it, but it seems like a very delicate operation. So there's packaging and shipping costs, and unless you're going to hand deliver each one of these, you'll have damages. So you have to sort of build up on the one side, that's how you're going to run your operation. On the other side, here's how I'm going to go find customers. And then you have to ask yourself, why would someone come and buy this guitar from me? What particular expertise am I bringing? You could have no expertise and make sure that you are 20% cheaper than every other place selling that guitar. You could be 20% more expensive than everyone else, but your ability to tune that guitar and customize it for the customer who wants it is second to none. And they will pay a premium for that service. You got to decide, what are you adding for the customer? And then what kind of an operation are you going to need to run in the background? And that's probably the best short answer I can give you. There's probably a 5-hour answer that I could give you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. We have time for one more question we're going to take from the chat. This is kind of more of a general question regarding books. Have you been seeing from your data working at Amazon, just working in publishing over the past 20 years, are younger people reading less or more than older readers? You know, you mentioned, you know, the TikTok age and the Gen Z age. What are you kind of seeing?
I think they're reading. I think they're reading differently. I think they're reading more than ever before. If you consider texts reading and email reading and visiting a website and reading and going to read a post on Facebook, it's all reading. You have to define your reading. If reading is long form, I think they're reading less. Not significantly less, interestingly. And Gen Z has a tendency to want to read digital in print, not in digital, when they're reading long form, which I also find fascinating. I wonder if there's sort of a digital exhaustion of having the phone all the time on and in your face. And so there might be a tendency to, if you're going to actually sit down and read a long form book, that you want to do that in print. But I'm not sure I think they're reluctant. They're more reluctant readers, but when you can get them hooked on a good story, frankly, any book that works is a good story. That's the only criteria. If you can get them hooked on a good story, they're actually reading quite a bit.
Amazing. With that, I think we're going to wrap it up for this evening, but I want to take the moment to thank David so much for taking the time out of his busy schedule to come and speak with us and speak with our young professionals community and the wider Sephardic community, all about his experience in the book publishing industry and also at Amazon itself. So David, thank you so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you all again so much for joining us. Tune in next week, this same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, for another great speaker session. This one will be with former U.S. Congresswoman Shelley Berkeley, former Congresswoman from Nevada with Sephardic heritage from Salonika, along in conversation with Dr. Devin Nahr, the Isaac Al-Haddaf Professor of Sephardic Studies. So it's going to be a wonderful session. So please do join us then, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And it's also specifically talking about politics and making sure that you go out and vote, that you make sure you get out and register to vote in the upcoming election. If you're interested also in finding out, again, more about our other classes, please feel free to check out SephardicBrotherhood.com/Sephardic Digital Academy. Thank you all so much again for joining us. Thank you to David again for joining us. And I'll wish you all a good night. Noche buena. Thank you all.